Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining me today. I'm really excited to bring you the latest insights on how we as a global employee communications community are evolving with generative AI. But by way of introduction, I approach this topic through two different lenses. The first is more than 30 years of business experience in Fortune 500 and Fortune 50 companies, along with local and national broadcast and print media. But also a second lens is through the academy. I'm currently an adjunct professor of communications at the Missouri School of Journalism, and I teach employee engagement and communications, as well as having written a book on this topic. But I really want to start this session with a quote that I believe sums up everything that's in front of us with AI. And this is it. Forgive me for reading this, but I really want to underscore a few of these words. It comes from me today, obviously, but when I think about the destination for the next 45 minutes or so, if I've done this right, I'd like to attribute this quote to every last one of us who works in employee communications. Essentially, that the combination of generative AI, and I want to underscore, and change management, it presents us as professionals with two unprecedented opportunities. The first is to deliver increasingly measurable business performance results. And the second, just as important, I think, is to elevate the influence for ourselves and that of our employee communications function to levels of unprecedented strategic importance. Okay, so these are the generative AI and change management, I believe, have the potential to define the value and the strategic value of communications to employees over the next decade and well beyond. Now, this presentation is not going into change management because there's so much to cover on AI, but I'd ask you, please view everything I'm telling you today about AI as part and parcel of change management. Now, last month, we conducted a survey of about 130 employee communicators across the globe in partnership with John Stemmel, who is with the Department of Strategic Communications at the Missouri School of Journalism, and with Populo, that really helped us reach out and engage folks with this survey. We asked this year, we're going to share at least some of the data that we collected, but we learned, having done a similar survey last year, that when generative AI last year was essentially in its relative infancy, and we can now very safely say it's only 9 months later, that it's already in its adolescent stage. So we added this new question to this year's survey, asking if we as a community view artificial intelligence as a new competency for us as professionals. And the answer is a whopping 93% of us said, yeah, this is a new skill that we have to learn. And importantly, I'm going to go back to the change management comment that I made. We're viewing change management as a requirement to support whatever it is that we're doing with AI. Because 73% of us said we believe that AI is going to require significant change management. And there's a similar statistic that came in for viewing change management as a new competency that we need to acquire. So both very consistent there. I want to ask a question here of all of you participating in this one, and that is, are you certified in any change management discipline? It doesn't matter which one. I happen to be certified in ProSci, but I'm just curious to know, have any of you taken any official training, and do you have certification in any kind of change management methodology or discipline? So take a look and see what we have. All right, how are we doing on results? Okay, so 17% say yes, and 83% are not yet. Okay, well, that's helpful to know because when we went back to our survey, we did in fact ask, we asked if change management, I'm sorry, here, hold a second. So the answer is that we hope that you'll consider, for the 80-some% that are not certified, we hope you'll consider doing that, because it really is a critical enabler for AI management in the foreseeable future. Not to mention all the other change competencies that we're asked to address. When we I'm a big believer that a picture is worth 1,000 words. And when I think about the state of generative AI for employee communications, I think this picture captures it beautifully. And not surprisingly, and the data from our survey shows that we're essentially experimenting with generative AI almost exclusively in ways that address our limited bandwidth, right? To save time or to make us and our teams more productive. But there's a far, far greater opportunity when we start thinking about the strategic uses, right? And today we're going to look at most of those capabilities that are available to us through strategic communications. And it looks a lot like these, right? So the ideas of looking at data analytics and sentiment analysis, predictive analytics, and leadership is another key area that will be an enabler for us to do more strategic work with the generative AI. So we asked also our communicators in the survey to use 3 words to describe how they're seeing AI delivering value for them. And here's what they said. So clearly, drafting content, saving or reducing time, generating ideas, all clearly are at the center. And we're going to talk about some of those ways in more detail. But while we're on the slide, I just want to draw attention to this little word that's on our radar right here when we talk about analysis, right? So analysis is a gateway to using analytics, which is one of the more strategic uses of AI. And I'm going to talk a lot more about this today. But these insights essentially have created the agenda I want to go through with you today. And this is what we're going to be covering. We're going to be looking at the rapidly changing perspectives in just 9 months for employee communications professionals since the last time we did this survey. We couldn't even wait a year because things were moving so fast. We're going to look at productivity and how quickly our adoption rates of AI technologies are increasing. Then we're going to pivot to the more strategic opportunities, and that is a natural to connecting to how do we lead in our organizations with AI. To be clear, this is a very big, massive change wave, and we need to ensure that we have a role in shaping how we and our organizations can use it responsibly. And we'll do that by understanding not just what AI is, but everything that's around it that shapes its use and its potential value. So we're going to start with a couple of slides as to how quickly our attitudes are changing toward AI. And this, again, is just in the last 9 months. For starters, we actually think increasingly that AI is good for society. We're seeing a pretty significant swing. 47% now see it's good for society, so it's almost half of us, and that's up from just a third 9 months ago when we did this survey. There's also a little less concern about AI replacing our jobs, which is always a fair issue to kind of raise, but we really did see that dropped about 7%. And whether AI is believed to be the future of employee communications, we're definitely seeing an increase here of 10%. More of us are believing that AI will be shaping the future of our work. So again, that was apples to apples comparison in 9 months. We asked if our employee comms folks are seeing AI applied to the business processes in general. And that stayed about the same in total, right? With a shift down from strongly agree to somewhat agree, but essentially it's about the same. We're seeing it. But when we get specific and ask, are you seeing it and used for employee communications? We're seeing a 21% increase in just 9 months, okay? And that's to our specific discipline. And we're seeing a 9% increase in employee communications using generative AI and seeing its value. And on a related note, employee communicators are moving out of the middle, right? So 11% of them are moving into agreeing on seeing value, where before they were mostly into the middle of undecided. So we're definitely see some very positive momentum and movement toward our attitudes, or with our attitudes toward AI. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit more about productivity and really kind of see where else we're seeing it. So we're going to talk about our use of productivity. So over the last couple of months, again, this was just a 9 months, we're seeing a lot of adjustments in how we're using AI for content generation and discussion guides, et cetera. And when we went back and asked this last month in March, we can see that the adoption rates for these kinds of uses of generative AI are up considerably, right? So you can see, I mean, 300+% for increase for video scripts and for basically content generation. The only place that it went down, honestly, was in people who said, I don't really see AI driving strategic value for employee communication. So that was the only place. Now, we also wanted to take the productivity uses and mix them in with other of the more strategic, just to give a quick illustration of how predominantly we're using artificial intelligence for productivity versus strategy. So if you look at this, these beautiful pink bars are mostly about productivity. The purple bars kind of generate more toward the strategic uses, and you can see they're not anywhere near what we're using in terms of generative AI for strategic as we are for productivity. So the good news is, while we're not using it for strategy just as much, we are actually seeing some real benefits in terms of time and how much it's saving us. Okay, so almost three-quarters of us realize time savings in one way or another by using generative AI for our work, and almost half of us are using that extra time to do more strategic pursuits. So all in all, it's a pretty good thing. Now, as for how much time specifically, almost 60% of us say it saves me about an hour or two a week, while the other 40% are saving 3 to 5 hours or even more each week. So these insights I've shared are coming from 2 in-depth research papers and 2 surveys. The first set was published last year, which I referenced earlier, and I'd strongly encourage and invite you to download both of those to bring yourself up to speed on where we've been, and that's on my northstarcomms.com site. But importantly, we also are making a brand new set this year, and I'm happy to say that on this very day, we are going to, hold on a second, we're going to release the 2024 survey data, some of which I mentioned that I'm sharing with you. And the folks at Populo have been very kind and said they're going to be sending it to you all directly, so you can get a really in-depth look at where we are and where you are as a community and your adaptation of generative AI. We're also going to be doing a brand new white paper, right? That talks about what's the landscape look like? What are we learning? How do I, access these kinds of tools? That will also be available in the next 3 to 4 weeks. So would encourage you also to check back with northstarcomms.com, and we'll be happy to make a copy of that available to you as well. Now, we're not going to have a lot of time to go into the landscape paper, but I do want to show you some of the topics that we're going to be planning on covering. So it's a pretty wide range, and this is all in addition to the items that we covered last year that have side-by-side comparisons of what are the tools out there, what are their pluses and their drawbacks. So it really gives you a sense of things that you can begin to experiment with. So we hope you'll find real value in tuning into that paper as well. All right, but before I want to talk about, before I get to strategy, I really do want to talk about one set of productivity apps, and that is going to be on translation, which is something that all of us continue to struggle with a bit. And as we do, there are 4 types of translation capabilities, some of which you may be familiar with, that are emerging as being higher quality. So Google Translate, DeepL, Microsoft Translator, and OpenAI GPT models. These are the models that are basically coming into their own by benefiting from extensive training data. And that allows them to generate accurate translations from a very wide range of language pairs. But there are other reasons that these 4 in particular are very, very strong. One is that they address the issues of indigenous and endangered languages, where there might be limited linguistic resources and documentation of languages spoken by smaller communities. Minority languages, so these are languages spoken within larger linguistic communities. And then low resource languages that are spoken in developing regions or countries of the world that have limited access to technology. And why are they so important? Well, number one, for emergency response and crisis management, especially internal comms for us, we see a direct relevancy to the development of these capabilities. and we ought to be kind of learning and experimenting with them. Also, for real-time translation, for those of you who are doing multilingual meetings or conferences or global town halls, for those of you who have more than one language where your employees are working, and also translation increasingly of user-generated content on those social platforms we're all learning with and adopting. So again, I want to just give this a quick nod because this is an area I think you want to pay a little bit more closer attention to on the productivity side. But I do want to shift to strategic uses of AI because I think that this is an opportunity for us to lean in and learn about how to address generative AI for strategic purposes versus what I call lagging and losing. And I'm going to start with a broad illustration of the strategic value of AI. Now, Accenture did some research on revenue growth starting in 2019 on companies that are using generative AI versus those that hadn't or don't. And between 2019 and 2022, you can see the disparity in revenue growth between these two types of companies or organizations. The purple line shows the revenue growth far outpacing the gray bar, which is, again, those that did not use AI. But looking at the last year through the forecast for 2026, the gap is going to widen considerably. 370% to be specific. And at times, basically, that's 2.4 times the growth rate for companies using AI versus those that don't. Why am I showing this to you? This has nothing to do with employee communications. Yes, it does. These are the numbers and the drivers of growth that your C-suite, your senior executives are looking at. They set a considerable context for why functions other than communications are or should be paying attention beyond productivity uses for generative AI. Let me give you some specifics about who's using this. Our HR colleagues are using AI in more strategic ways to drive their performance. Gartner in 2022 reported the number of HR organizations adopting AI rose from 17% to 32%, right, between 2021 and 22, and more than 2/3 of those deployed AI to improve database making decisions, right? Deloitte also added in their own study that says 2/3 of CEOs don't believe that they're recruiting fast enough to keep up with the demands of the business. So the question we asked is whether employee communicators were using AI for strategic purposes. And are you ready for the answer? Here it is. 76% said that their employees were using AI for some business purpose, but that they were not using it for communications or that they were unsure, which to me says it's probably, if you don't know that they're using it for communications purposes and you're in communications, it's probably a fair bet to say they're not using it. So we have to ask ourselves, if HR and other parts of the business are using AI for strategic reasons, what are we waiting for? Why aren't we using generative AI for strategy? Well, this brings me to want to talk about why and how we can do this. So here's a very quick and high-level explanation of how we need to understand core computer science concepts of deep learning, machine learning, and artificial intelligence, and their connections to the practice of predictive analytics that we need to understand specifically for employee comms. On the left side, we have a diagram with deep learning, machine learning, and AI. Let me explain it to you this way. Deep learning is basically where our data scientists, our software engineers, and data engineers thrive. They are writing the codes that inform how computers think to create what are called artificial neural networks. That's where computers model and they understand complex patterns in data. And deep learning has shown remarkable success in tasks such as image and speech recognition and natural language processing, things that we may be using already. Now, when we move outside to that larger circle for machine learning, this is where we use those artificial neural networks to develop algorithms and techniques to learn from data and help us see and predict what, without being specifically programmed to do that, we can think of the space as libraries of code waiting for us to use. And this is where we can do those predictive analytics. And then finally, artificial intelligence is where we use machine learning and deep learning to do the tasks that we normally do as human beings, using all those apps that we're using. Now, if we go back to machine learning, this is where we can teach computers to take our data and make predictions that we can use to inform our strategies and we should or what we should be doing using the unique data that we have from our employee communications work. Now, this is a super rudimentary explanation of what computer scientists and machine learning engineers are doing in this space. And in our survey last month, we asked employees to agree or disagree with the following statement. I understand what machine learning is. And a whopping 70% said, yes, they understand what machine learning is, which was a bit of a surprise to us. So we want to ask you a question this morning in our second poll, a little more specific, and that is, do you agree or disagree with, I know how to use machine learning for employee communications? So it's more of a specific, are you familiar with machine learning and how to do it, how to use it for specifically our craft and employee communication? So we'd love to get your answers to this. All righty, we'll take a look and see what the results are. So 21% say yes, and the vast majority, almost 80%, say no. All right, so this is more consistent with some of the other feedback that we got. It was encouraging to see that when we asked employee communicators, do you think you're going to need to learn to engage with machine learning? 67% said, yeah, I definitely need to engage with machine learning and learn, and we're going to learn about that in just a little bit. Now, to address the issue of the last poll question on machine learning and using predictive analytics, AI can help us as communicators make more informed decisions on things like time and tone of our content and the content itself. It can be used to measure the impact of our content both internally and to optimize content strategies, content repackaging, and even different platforms and audiences that we work with. So we can think about it as this can be used to help us create headlines or subheads that will have greater engagement content. Predictive analytics can also be used to determine which content will work best in any given channel that we may be using or managing. Let me share a specific example of what our colleagues in HR are doing. Okay, so the example is voluntary attrition. This is a big issue for a lot of us, and particularly at the front line. So IBM's Watson does what we call a predictive attrition program, and it can predict with 95% accuracy which employees are about to quit. The program offers recommendations to managers on how to engage and retain their employees, including employees what they should be learning to get ahead in their careers. So companies like Retrain AI, Eightfold AI, HR Signal are part of a whole new crop of talent intelligence platforms specializing in predictive analytics that utilize big public data to make inferences. In this case, predictive analytics helps us interpret the findings and implement appropriate interventions. And that's got to include communication. So you're saying, yeah, but that's HR, Mark. What about the employee communications? Well, let me answer that question by saying that essentially predictive attrition is only one of many, many business challenges that predictive analytics can solve. Beyond attrition, there's a whole world of business issues that predictive analytics for employee communications can solve. We're already collecting a lot of data. Just look at the items I've listed here in pink. I mean, this happens almost on a regular basis, either directly or indirectly through comms or through ongoing measurement efforts for employee attitudes. And those data sets need to work harder for us. We can use them to develop communication strategies for a wide range of issues. Maybe it's digital transformation or cultural transformation or engagement scores. We just need to know how to do it, right? So here's a very high-level answer to how we can do that. The big headline here is that machine learning is going to take a village for now. There's not an off-the-shelf thing that we can do to create or to use machine learning by ourselves unless we happen to have very, very deep skills. But essentially, let me kind of walk you through two paths that we might be able to use. So this is just a schematic. On the left side, think of us as the person at the top. We're in charge of this as employee communicators, and we want to use predictive analytics. We have a couple of choices, right? We can work with a data scientist, that's on the left side, right? And either in-house or maybe it's somebody in our IT or IT security, or they put us in touch with a contractor. That's if we have a relatively simple need, and we just want to run a couple of quick questions and get some answers for data that we have and what it can help us solve. But if we have something a bit more complex, okay, we're going to go down the right side. We'll probably have to hire a business consultant or someone who has significant project management skills. And that person is going to be working with the data scientists that we had on the left side and the software engineers, but also people like subject matter experts who have technology capabilities. So think of this as somebody inside our organization. Maybe they run our HR systems, PeopleSoft or Workday. But bottom line is we're going to have to make some new friends in the world of IT and really understand the kinds of resources that we're going to have partners with in order to do predictive analytics. Now, once they have this data, this is essentially at a very high level what they're going to be doing. They're going to gather and clean the data sets that we provide for them. And for example, engagements rates from data that comes from our intranets or maybe org health scores and other data sets that we have. And then they're going to work with machine learning tools like TensorFlow or PyTorch. These are names that you probably want to learn more about as we go on. But for now, just think of them as those libraries for codes that can be used to teach the computer how to deliver the answers that we're looking for. The outcome of all these people and tools and processes working together will be getting predictive analytics to tell us when and where and how to communicate specific types of employees in much more specific ways. So we all are aware of the concept of hyper-personalization. This is the kind of stuff that will get us there. There's so much more to this. And we're going to be developing some training in June for this, but we're hoping that this begins to paint a picture of where we can go strategically for AI and for our function. Now, not all strategic applications require reams of data or machine learning engineers. I'm going to give you an example of one that you can do today all by yourself, and that's called backcasting. Okay? Backcasting is essentially a planning method that starts with a desired or a future outcome and works backward to identify steps that are needed to reach that goal. So let's just say, for example, we went to ChatGPT and we would describe something in a future state. Let's say it's 2035 and our company has achieved carbon neutrality. We've reduced emissions to zero and our operations are completely sustainable. We would ask ChatGPT to engage in a conversation with us, and we'd ask it, how do we achieve this future state? What were the key milestones along the way? Strategies and initiatives, who were the stakeholders, et cetera, et cetera. Just to give you a sample, if you use that for a general business purpose. But let's use one for ourselves, right? Just like let's make up, we'll do a demonstration to show you using a kind of a scenario that we're going to create in December of 2026, a couple of years from now. My company has less than 1% voluntary attrition at the front line, an issue we've talked about. And it's all because we've done a great job with employee communication starting this year. And some key data points that we knew was that 40% of our frontline didn't have company-issued mobile device, and 20% of our frontline worked in locations where local management or work council rules prevented them from engaging. 43% didn't have content in local language. Okay, so we're starting to give a little bit more insight to ChatGPT. And we didn't have alignment on governance between global and local internal communications channels. So for those of you who work in more larger and more complex, so we asked then, how do we get to this future state where we had less than 1% voluntary attrition, and what were those key milestones? And you can see the questions. I just want to show you very quickly through ChatGPT, and we could use Bing or Bard or any of the other generative AI tools to do this. But what I really want to do is show you if we were to go to ChatGPT. I already have this pre-programmed. There we go. So you should be able to see this on your screen. And what I've done, I'm going to take, one second. Thought I had this ready. Sorry, guys. No, I had it in there earlier. Well, hold on. One moment. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to plug this in, the content that you just saw on your last on the last slide, right? There it is, 2026. Here are the questions that we're asking. And we're going to ask ChatGPT to help us do some backcasting, right? So it takes just a moment to figure out. And now it's going to give us some ideas on the things that we've asked it for, right? For key milestones and who we engaged, what the strategies were, et cetera, the strategies and the initiatives. So this is just a great thought partner to have to use backcasting as a potential use for generative AI with predictive analytics. Now, here's something else you could do. If you ask it those questions, even before you ask that questions, I could type in something like ask, you know, no, it's not working with me here. Um, at least 10 questions to better understand what I know about employees in my company. All right. So you can do that, right? And the more you tell it to ask you and the more information you provide. So these are the types of questions that it can ask you to have that conversation to get even to more specifics about what is the prediction that we ought to be thinking about and the solution that gets us to that future state by doing what we call backcasting. So again, just a different way of using predictive analytics that doesn't require a big budget or working with machine learning engineers or any kinds of additional concepts here. All right, so let me see if I can get back to this. Here we go. And all right, guys, we should be back to our regular screen. Okay. And there we go. All right. So we wanted to move on a little bit further and understand where we are with being able to influence artificial intelligence. And it can be very overwhelming because things are just happening so fast. But it's also a strong signal to us that we've got to learn and we've got to lead artificial intelligence versus waiting and seeing what happens. So we asked our survey takers if they or someone from their organization's employee comms function was actively engaged in shaping how AI is used, and only 45% said yes. So that was a little concerning, and we think that that's a pretty big opportunity. So we hope that you'll find some ways, or we'll give you some ideas on how to do that. All right. So I want to talk again now about leading AI, right? And I'm going to start with 3 very quick products or concepts, and then we'll be able to take a couple of quick questions. So I'm going to start with regulation. There's a lot going on with regulation, both in the U.S. and external and in all countries across the world. The legislative bodies in 127 countries last year passed 37 laws, according to Stanford University. And the EU's AI Act is the world's first comprehensive AI law that went into effect last year. And Parliament's priority there is to make sure that any systems used in the EU for AI are safe and transparent, that they're traceable and non-discriminatory, and that they're environmentally friendly. And in the U.S., Axios reports that we have all kinds of issues happening here. Last July, our Congress introduced a bipartisan Create AI Act to give students and researchers access to AI resources. And then in October, President Biden signed an executive order on the safe, secure, and trustworthy development and use of artificial intelligence. So lots of stuff going on here. And I can absolutely assure you this is going to change and reshape the environment that we're using, in which we're using AI for business purposes. Next, ESG. Most people don't really think about this, but especially on the environmental side of our ESG policies, NGOs and employees are going to start increasingly becoming aware that these generative AI systems use a lot more energy, right? So in the case of ChatGPT, the estimate is 502 million pounds of CO2 going into the atmosphere as a result. That's an estimated, of course. But it basically is putting increasing resources on these systems being able to use less power and energy efficient hardware such as specialized AI accelerators and low power processors. So that's all coming. And then the last area I want to just mention real quickly is copyright. If you ask any corporate attorney what they're most concerned about, and I did that very recently, the answer is who owns the information and who's accountable for it. And that's basically, if and more likely when something runs afoul with information that we create through generative AI, the attorneys want to know who is accountable for that. And one of the first tests on copyright, just for example, is already in the courts here in the US. The New York Times has sued OpenAI and Microsoft over copyright issues associated with its written works. So stay tuned for where that all goes, because that's going to change a lot of what we're using, what we have access to, and how we have to attribute our sources, et cetera, the transparent nature that we're going to have to adopt in terms of telling people that we're using AI. Finally, security and privacy always are an issue, and not surprisingly, it's number one and number two for employees as in terms of a barrier in using artificial intelligence. And just as a case in point, this is about ethics in using. You may be aware of a company called Aware. It was formerly called Wiretap. It's a company based in Columbus, Ohio. And what they do is they have access to more than 20 billion individual interactions electronically and 3 million employees through very large companies. So it's all they do it for the right reasons, which is to say, we want to make sure that if there's a threat against the company or a violation of our policy, that we know where and how that's coming from. But of course, on the flip side, it's, well, wait a minute, how does that impact employee privacy and trust? And that's part of our job, is to help build that privacy and trust. All right, so the question now is, wow, how do we, what are the things that we're concerned about? So we talked about accuracy, we talked about security, and another thing that we're talking about is we don't know how to learn more about AI, and it's still almost a little over a third of us aren't really sure that it can help us in our work. And we're going to try and do something to help that, and that is with AI for communicators.com. So I'm working with John Stemmel, and I mentioned before, my partner at the University of Missouri School of Strategic Communications, and with Sharon McIntosh, who you may have heard in an earlier presentation this morning. And we're getting ready to launch 9 specific modules based for where our community is on understanding whether they need basics for employee comms or strategic AI applications, or want to look into leading. So these are all things, if you want to scan that code at the top, you can get on our mailing list, and we'll update you with when we're going to be offering those. But this is the big takeaway that I really want to close with, and then take your questions. We've got to continue exploring AI for productivity. That's a slam dunk. We're doing it. We got to keep doing it. Number two, and even bigger, we have to lean into the strategic uses of AI for internal comms. Guys, if we're going to catch up with HR and some of the other folks in our other functions that are using it, we need to get in front of this, and we need to be able to lead those strategic uses and get into the predictive analytics and show that we can solve business problems. That means we need to learn how to lead AI, and that means we need to understand all those privacy issues, all those things that are going on around it. And finally, we've got to approach AI with change management and through the change comms lens. So I've gone through a lot, and very, very quickly, we do have a few minutes for questions. And I'm going to pass this on to Erin to help moderate that questions that you might have.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Just wonderful. Had a lot of great engagement in the chat. So thank you to everyone who's been participating there. We did get a few questions.
Erin, I can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now, Mark? Mark?
Yep, now I can hear
me.
Yep,
okay,
I got you.
Sorry about that.
Right.
No, just we have a few minutes for questions, and thank you for all the great engagement in the chat. Just jumping over because we have about 5 minutes. What's your message to companies that are currently blocking access to AI?
My message to employees with in those companies is, don't stop. Learn on your own. I almost can guarantee you that the time will come, and whether it's 6 months or 1 year, your company will change its position on this. Think about how many companies responded initially to the internet when it came up. Think about how companies often responded initially to social media when those that came up with the no, we're not going to use it, eventually have all kind of turned around. And what you don't want to do is to wait, right, until they give you the all clear to then catch up. And it's going to be, you're going to be even further behind. So you can certainly present to your companies, here's what our competitive set is doing. You can share the data that I've got in this new report that shows, look, you're the outliers now. More of these companies are doing this. The big issue is to say, how do we do it safely? And that's where you've got to step in and lead. So you engage your IT, your legal, your HR colleagues and say, guys, let's make a case that why we have to do this. And even in the most stringent regulated environments, these companies are still trying to find a way to do it. They can do it by creating their own versions of ChatGPT, working with Copilot on Microsoft, for example, behind the firewall. Companies are coming up with different solutions for this. Don't be the one that waits. And if you're forced to wait, don't you be the one that falls into that waiting trap. Continue to explore on your own and learn this. Believe me, your company will appreciate you all the more when it's time to change directions.
Great, thanks, Mark. Next, and this was kind of a theme that I saw in the chat as well, how do you suggest IC takes the lead on implementing AI?
Well, I kind of just referenced it, Aaron, and that is make sure that you have a seat at the table. And if there is a group that's convened in your organization, and with only 45% of us reporting that we have a policy, that pretty much tells me the vast majority of us have a big opportunity ahead of us. So convene the group. Say, I want to pull together somebody from legal, from someone in IT, someone in HR, and I'm going to be the chair of this committee. And we're going to start looking at this together. What I'm most concerned about is that if we wait for legal or IT or another function to define how we're going to use it, our opportunity to influence this and to do what we need it for our purposes may really be diminished. So I think that's the opportunity, is to step in and lead it, convene, come up with the rules of engagement, make sure all the right parties are engaged and aligned, and then go to it.
Great. I think we have time for one last question, but before we do that, Mark, would you mind going back to the slide with the QR code? We had somebody ask if you could share that again.
Sure. One second.
Great, thank you.
It's okay.
So
Sorry.
last question. What should IC teams focus on first when initially adopting AI, content creation or strategy?
I think content creation is a great place to start because it is sort of the low-hanging fruit. I mean, you will benefit by taking advantage of what that can do to increase your bandwidth. We're all pressed for time and creating content, especially as you read the new landscape paper that we're going to have, working across multimodal disciplines that can create content for print, for digital, for video, etc. That's going to be a big plus up just to free you up so that you can focus on the more strategic uses, which essentially is what our survey takers told us. So focus on that first, but don't do it at the expense of not doing anything on the strategy. Understand, what is IT hiring people to do machine learning? Are there people in-house that you can tap? Have they identified people externally who can be your good business consultants and partners and help you work through this? These are the things that you ought to be doing concurrently. But the low-hanging fruit that you can absolutely do, I think, with a lot less resistance, is really looking at the more productivity-based.